forward to discussing this. I've been thinking about this subject for a long time, and as was just mentioned, wrote a book that just came out in English, German, I think it's about to come out in French and other languages, called The Madness of Crowds, which is an attempt to try to think about some of these things that are going on, some of the, what I describe as crowd madnesses that particularly the online world encourages, where very often we cancel people, destroy people for saying something that everyone thought until 24 hours ago. And we're making up and evolving a lot of our ethics and I'd say the metaphysics as we go along, and it's very confusing. However, I think we can identify certain trends that are going on, and one of them is that there are a set of what I describe as tripwire issues, which any journalist, citizen, absolutely anybody, if they just nick one of these tripwires with their foot, can find causes total career implosion. They, broadly speaking, there are a few others, but I say that they come down roughly to gay, everything to do with women, particularly relations between the sexes, everything to do with race, and absolutely everything to do with trans. So I decided to do a chapter on each in my latest book to try to say what are the discussions we perhaps ought to be having and the ones that we're not having. Now, I'm very conscious, by the way, that a lot of this, I just throw this out for, particularly for English speakers in the audience, or all English speakers, but all people from English-speaking nations, that a lot of these phenomena at the moment seem to me to be particularly prevalent in Britain, America, Canada, Australia. A number of other countries, particularly across Europe, do have bits of it, but including France, but almost nowhere, actually nowhere as virulently as in the countries I've just listed. And that's worth bearing in mind. I think it's a very interesting question as to why it's particularly virulent in these countries, these discussions go on. So what is it that's going on? Well, let me, as it were, do the opposite of straw manning and try to steel man this, because this is something I also happen to agree with. It seems that one of the things we're trying to do is a very noble aspiration, and it's something like this. We're trying to come to a position where somebody with a competency, indeed anybody with a competency in a particular area, is never held back from achieving what they could achieve because of some characteristic. So no young girl growing up anywhere thinks they can't be something because they're a girl. Nobody who's LGBT thinks they can't get anywhere because of their sexuality, and nobody, whatever their skin color, is held back from anywhere because of their skin color. That seems to be almost agreed upon. I put it out there, as I say, because it's one that almost across political sides, you could say, is a common aspiration. The problem that I try to identify and go into, among other things, is what if we're, in trying to achieve that, doing something that's making things an awful lot worse? Now, it is, as you all know, incredibly unwise for any man to talk about women. So I'm going to completely duck that one today. It's extremely unwise to talk about race if you have my skin color. So I'm also going to duck that one. And let me today just focus on the one crampon that I have on the edifice of social justice, which is the G bit in LGBT. And I'm going to treat myself to showing you an example of what I think is going on, which is very unwise in the media, just on this area. Now, let me give you, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what I would describe as an overcorrection that's happening in the media on this issue, as I would argue in others as well. And I'm going to focus on two news organizations quickly, the BBC and the New York Times. I'm not singling them out for any reason other than that they are very prominent news organizations with well-deserved international reputations. One weekend in 2018 on the BBC's website, the front page news website and the BBC, one of the top stories was that the diver Tom Daley had felt inferior about his sexuality but that it had given him motivation to succeed. This was one of the top stories on the website. It was 5 years after Daly had come out, and just underneath that was news that a tsunami in Indonesia had killed at least 800 people. One day later, and the BBC's front page of the news website had as one of its lead stories that day the news that a minor reality television star in Britain called Ollie Locke had announced that he and his fiancée, Gareth Locke, were going to join their surnames to become the Locks after their forthcoming nuptials. Underneath that was the headline that the death toll in Indonesia had risen significantly overnight. The New York Times, on the 16th of October 2017, this is the international edition of the New York Times, the business section leads with a two-page story headlined, "Gay in Japan and No Longer Invisible." And it relays the story of a Japanese businessman who had come out in his office in Tokyo, and nobody had any problem with it. And what's more, as the story went on to say, Japan isn't a very homophobic society. So this was, man comes out in not very homophobic country and nobody cares. But that was the 2 pages of lead news story in the New York Times. If you turned to the culture section in the New York Times that day, there was a picture of 2 men dancing, and it was the news that the New York City Ballet had decided to turn one of the female roles into a male role so that 2 men were dancing together, and it had a massive news story about what an incredible breakthrough this was in the obviously previously very virulently heterosexual world of ballet. So, but for some reason we have fallen, and we can get into why perhaps, into this very strange fragmented view of society which fragments along these very specific lines. And I'm going to finish because I'm conscious of the clock, but I just wanted to finish by saying this. What if all of this isn't making things better? What if it isn't erasing these differences? What if it isn't saying to people you can be whatever you want to be, but it's actually making these differences accentuated? It's playing off races against each other, it's playing off the sexes against each other, it's playing off sexual minorities against majorities. What if we're not doing something that's making things better, but just doing something that's making it an awful lot worse? Thank you.
Thanks, Douglas.
So it's hard not to agree with Douglas Murray when he speaks. And as he mentioned about in his book, those 4 chapters or the 4 tripwires that are out there right now, that if you're talking about, like he said, women, if you say something wrong about women and you step into it, basically, you could be looking at, career suicide, basically. You could be looking at, the end of everything for you. If your race is another huge booby trap, you say the wrong thing because of the color of your skin, especially if you happen to be white. Oh boy, that is a huge landmine. Then they're talking about the LGBTQ movement, another tripwire, another landmine. And then the biggest one that's out there lining it, sort of like the DMZ between North and South Korea, is the transgender landmines that are out there. I mean, they're not just in front of you, they're in back of you, they're on the right, they're on the left. They're in the, if you take the diagonals, they're there, north, south, east, west, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. I mean, the whole compass, it just surrounds you. And to try to tiptoe through those without, cracking any eggs. And if you happen to crack one, even if you just crack the shell, you don't even break it. You don't even spill any yolk, nothing at all. As Douglas so, eloquently said, you just nicked the tripwire. Wow. Things could be tumbling down upon you very, very quickly. But the other thing that he mentioned about was he basically said, I want to stay on the subject he talked about, with the gay movement. Obviously, because Douglas says, that he's gay himself. And he was talking about the New York Times, which I call the New York Crimes, and the BBC. We could say a lot of things about those 2 entities. but that these at once great institutions that did absolutely phenomenal work in the field of journalism and investigative studies and were really known for speaking the truth and the truth to power have completely done a 180. And as he just took those examples out there, instead of leading with other very pertinent stories, these were front page stories about, two people deciding to get married. They put their both last names together. Or that in the ballet, they got rid of a woman's position so two men could dance together. And I just wonder what the women's movement could, but if you say something like that, you'll get the people from the other side saying, hey, those women, those men, they're women too. Forget about the fact that a woman's position from the ballet has been taken over by a man. Oh, we don't want to talk about that. But if you start talking about that, that could threaten your livelihood. It could threaten you to get canceled. It could threaten you to get doxxed. It could threaten a whole bunch of things. So as Douglas was bringing these things up, very important things to consider. Let's go to now the opening statement from Sylvana Simons and see what this leftist has to say.
The guy you see on the screen right now is Ben van der Kooi. And last night, Dutch media outlet Rijnmond.nl, that serves as a regional broadcaster and is partly publicly funded, published a big portrait, as they call it, of him, of Ben van der Kooi, highlighting his patriotic activism. The rest of us in the Netherlands know that Van der Kooi is a multiple convicted neo-Nazi who got to speak freely in a written piece online and a podcast facilitated by a public news source. Less than a week ago, in the city of The Hague, the city that is home to the International War Tribunal, the city that is also known as the City of Peace, the city where our national parliament resides, and also the royal city because of its residents, the royal family, thousands of progressive but mainly moderate Dutch people came together to protest Black Pete. For those of you who don't know, Black Pete is the much debated racist blackface character, part of the Dutch tradition of Sinterklaas, our Dutch version of Santa Claus. Supposed to be a yearly celebration of childhood innocence, Sinterklaas, a white saint, comes to town with his blackface helpers, who apparently are black from going through the chimney and leaving presents in children's shoes. As these people were protesting Black Pete, these activists who were protesting Black Pete were surrounded by a large number of police to protect them against extremely violent hooligans, neo-Nazis, and self-proclaimed white supremacists, such as Ben van der Kooi. How do I know they were extremely aggressive? Well, a week before this national demo and manifestation, while a small delegation of organizers were meeting up in preparation, they were attacked by the same group of people who claim that their freedom of speech and expression is under attack. Because a growing number of Dutch people claim that after 150 years it's time to say goodbye to blackface, stereotyping black people and people of color and using colonial references to do so. In expression of their anger, they stormed the building wearing forage caps, shouting racial slurs. They threw fire bombs into the building, and the car of one of the front men of KOZP, this is the group of people protesting Black Pete, his car was completely smashed. The group of people that did that were about 50 to 60, ranging in ages from 13 to 50. 2 people are in custody at the moment relating to this incident. That's 2 out of the 60, and it means to me that 58 people were very much free to express themselves, even in the most aggressive and detrimental way possible, without any ramifications. In fact, the irony is that the mere reason my friends, party members and comrades were so brutally attacked in the first place is because of exercising their right to the freedom of speech by claiming that Black Pete is a racist caricature character. And I see no lie in that. Yet still, people, some of them politicians, some of them columnists, some of them journalists, some of them neo-Nazi hooligans, are trying to silence us in speaking our truth. So I beg to differ that so-called political correctness or wokeness results in less free speech. I can safely say from my own personal experience that it seems to me that more can be said by some rather than as well as less by others in the current political climate, at least in the Netherlands. Right-wing discourse is on the rise in my home country, and on a daily basis people say the harshest things about non-binary people, women, people of color, Muslims, refugees, people with disabilities, undocumented people, basically everybody that isn't a white, male, able body of a certain age. 2 decades ago, this was unthinkable, or at least it would have been considered improper or just insulting. Issues like racial profiling by police, for example, are justified right now as a necessary evil, rather than recognizing its structural racism. Because you see, it's not that it is no longer allowed to say what you want to say. It's about being held accountable for what one says, taking responsibility for the words and the language that one uses. One has to be aware that words are not neutral, that they have histories and connotations, and one just cannot ignore that. Words have power, and they can reinforce systems of inequality and suppression. Thus, you can still use these words. You can still be free to speak, yet you need to be aware of what you're saying, and that if your words are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, well, somebody might just call you a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, or a transphobe. People will respond to it. So yes, you can say whatever you want to say. All you have to do is own your words and expect others to respond to what you're saying. So, as long as you own what you say, as far as I'm concerned, you can say anything. We can talk about anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you just heard from Sylvana Simons, who I believe is a member of the parliament or in government in the Netherlands. And once again, sort of like another one of her acolytes in this leftist Marxist, socialist type, movement, Flavia Kleiner, who also debated Douglas Murray, and we've got a whole set of videos that you can check it out. Flavia Kleiner, Douglas Murray, check that out on the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show on her videos. Just basically brings a laundry list, and she starts off by saying that there's a guy who happens to be a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist, and you had a group of people from the Netherlands who came out to protest, a holiday that is celebrated in the Netherlands, of where Santa Claus is there with his helpers who are in blackface because as they came down the chimney, they got black, and they celebrate this. And so this group of Netherlands were out there protesting against that, saying that this is a 150-year-old tradition, but it needs to be gone. It's not politically correct. They're obviously woke social justice warriors, virtue signalers, but that's fine. That's their First Amendment right, or whatever right they have to freedom of speech and to protest. And she said there was a group of 50 to 60 neo-Nazis that were there to counter-protest. And a couple of them got out of hand. They were arrested. The rest weren't. And she basically makes that sound as if that's pretty ominous, that, only 2 out of 60, that's a very poor percentage. And the rest of them continued to do whatever heinous acts they were doing. Okay. Nobody got hurt. I guess a car was destroyed or something, according to her. But as far as she said, it didn't seem she mentioned any injuries or whatever. But when Douglas was basically talking about what was happening in the media, and he gave some concrete examples as to what's important or whatever, all right, in her mind, she feels that this is important because she doesn't like the fact that they're celebrating this 150-year-old tradition of blackface. And I think that's, That's up to the people at that point to decide. And the people will let you decide and say, you know what they'll allow you to do, because again, you'll probably be canceled or lose a job or lose friends or lose a position in academia or whatever. Something will happen that will force you to realize, okay, that this isn't something that you should do, because most of the people are against it. Unless it becomes completely outlawed, but then it would be going against free speech. Then she talks about profiling and racial profiling that the police are still doing. And she doesn't like this at all. So in other words, if somebody steals something, you're not supposed to ask who it was. Was it a man or woman? Can't tell you. Can't tell you who it was, man or woman. Okay, can you tell me it's white, black, or brown? I can't tell you that. Okay, could you tell me if it was alive or dead? Can't tell you that. Was it an animal, plant, or vegetable? Oh, can't tell you that. That would be profiling. That's what they're talking about, folks. I mean, literally, okay, the sheer stupidity of some of the things they're talking about. Then they were talking about, she mentioned the fact that your words have meanings and there's context. And own your words. Because if you own your words, that's okay with her. But make sure you own them. Don't disown them. Say what you want. And then she says, if you say something that's sexist, that's, that's racist, that's bigoted, that's problematic, whatever it is that she and people on her side of the aisle think is racist, bigoted, sexist, misogynistic, phobic, whatever that is, well, then you just might be a racist, a bigot, a misogynist, a phobe, because according to them, what you say in their meaning of the words are those definitions. So basically is damned if you do, damned if you don't. That's exactly what her position is. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I've been your host, Dr. Nasser. Hope you've enjoyed this content that we bring. If we did and earned a subscription from you, we'd certainly love you to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell, like, share, and follow us. You know what to do. Check out all our video links above and below. I'll leave you with my final thought, which is, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.